our city from the work that you have put together. I think that will help us greatly as we go forward in the city, as we embrace a promising future, knowing we have such a volume of work to draw on. To understand our past is a huge, huge legacy, and you deserve this honor more than any. It's my great honor to present you with the George Woodcock Lifetime Achievement Award. Chuck Davis. Thank you.
In my frequent visits to the Vancouver Public Library, I often walk by the plaques set into the pavement in recognition of previous recipients of this wonderful award. And I often find myself thinking, gee, it'd be nice to do something to get up there. And now it appears I have done so. Still, there's a small snickling voice at the back of my brain that looks at those names: Eric Nichol, Jane Rule, Barry Broadfoot, Alice Munro, Peter Trower, George Ogawa, W.B. Kinsella, and others. But then I was reminded of a wonderful story I heard about George Bernard Shaw at the premiere of his play, Arms and the Man. At the end of the premiere performance, Shaw came out on stage, and the audience gave him a standing ovation, wave after wave of applause. And Shaw stood there, blinking and nodding and smiling. And suddenly, in the middle of all this wave of adulation, a man began to loudly boo. And Shaw said, "My dear fellow, I quite agree with you, but what are we two against so many?" I accept the verdict, and I accept with humility and pride and gratification and a dozen other emotions this wonderful award. By the way, for trivia collectors, a curious note: Audrey Thomas, who won the award in 2003, and I were born on exactly the same day, November 17, 1935. She in New York, and I in Winnipeg. Only I would collect that kind of crap. She got here 7 years before I did. My interest in, and eventually my fascination with Vancouver's history began rather late in life. I was in my 40s, and I was doing an items column for the province. That's a column where you see names in boldface, separated by little 3-dot ellipses. And I was driving over the Burrard Bridge one day, for about the 10,000th time, when I, for the first time, actually looked at that bridge. It's a very attractive structure. It opened in 1932. Its Art Deco elements are still striking. The two prows of boats with the letters B and V on the boats above the heads of George Vancouver and Harry Burrard. The city's colorful coat of arms, the giant lamps at either end of the bridge. And for the first time, I found myself asking, who did all this? So instead of devoting my Sunday column to more of the city's movers and shakers, and the moved and the shaken, I went to the archives, which is quite close to the south end of the Burrard Bridge, and decided to write a bit about the history of the bridge. One of the things I discovered, thanks to a chief of personal correspondence between Major Grant, who had designed much of the bridge, its engineering elements, there was a sheaf of correspondence between him and a friend in the States about a more well-known engineer in Vancouver who had been actively trying to wrest the commission from Grant. And so they had a royal battle there. I also learned that the giant lamps at either end of the bridge were a tribute by Grant to prisoners of World War I, Allied prisoners, who had built great fires in their yards during the winter to keep warm. That kind of thing thickens the history of the city. When you're driving around and you remember those sorts of things. Readers' reaction to the column was good, and I'd enjoyed my research, so I decided to do another historical column the following Sunday. Aileen Campbell, by the way, had been doing items like that for the province earlier, but by then she was retired. I ended up writing 194 consecutive Sunday columns on the history of Vancouver, and might still be doing them 30 years later if the province hadn't switched from broadsheet to tabloid and history columns were no longer wanted. But by then I had caught the bug, and my mild interest in Vancouver's past and the past of its immediate surroundings had become something far more time and brain and heart-consuming. With the help of nearly 200 others, I edited a book called the Vancouver Book, which both Gregor and Ellen praised warmly, which appeared in 1976, and which I described as an urban almanac, and which was quite successful. Now, this is a story I've told before, and if you've heard it before, I'm sorry, I have to tell it again. At the end of 1976, I was told by the staff at the Vancouver Public Library that the Vancouver Book was the second most frequently stolen book in the system. And I was absolutely delighted. And I had to ask what the most stolen book was. Of course, it turned out to be Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. When I was doing the successor to my book, the Greater Vancouver Book, I happened to mention that fact to Denny Boyd, one of the writers. And he said, well, thank God the other guy isn't planning a sequel. My sequel, the Greater Vancouver Book, appeared in 1997, sold 12,000 copies, and put me into a debt to an unbelievable degree. The book was far more costly than I had anticipated. In fact, there were some unpaid writers in the audience tonight. So if you see anybody leaving, you'll know why. It is still at 901 pages. I count the colored pages, Gregor. That's why it's bigger. It's still the largest general trade book ever published in British Columbia. So big, in fact, that I often forget what's in there and will occasionally phone the library for a bit of fact, only to have the librarian return after a moment to say something like, well, according to the Greater Vancouver, I'd forgotten what was in there. I was recently asked by a local writer doing a piece on me that will appear in Vancouver Magazine what I thought my legacy might be. And I thought back to a time when I was walking into the library. I spent a lot of time in the library, which will make Paul Whitney happy, and in its old location on Burrard Street, and encountered a young student walking out of the building with one of my books under her arm. And I pointed at it and said, school assignment? And she said yes. She had to write about her neighborhood, and then she was gone. That's a legacy. And let me share with you a small story that illustrates the usefulness of a book like this. I used to give slide talks to local elementary school kids. This is many years ago. In the first school I went to, they had about 100 kids gathered in the library, the gymnasium, at grades 4, 5, and 6. And I started showing my slideshow. One of the pictures showed Vancouver City Hall, with in front of it a statue of George Vancouver, famous, well, there. And I said to the kids, okay, there's Vancouver City Hall. Who can tell me who that man is? And 100 voices shouted out with complete confidence, George Washington. That was my reaction. I laughed. I said, why would they have a statue of George Washington, an American president, in front of Vancouver City Hall? Answer your phone, Elf. That's my oldest friend here. And, sorry to point you out. And, but it happened at every school I went to. I went to about 48 or 49. One school, private school, knew the answer. All of the others, they all shouted out George Washington. That meant there were thousands and thousands of kids at that time. Some of you may be in the audience now who think that it was George Washington in front of Vancouver City Hall. That's why I think a book like this would be useful. And so that's another legacy. And by the way, I wanted to keep my equanimity and wit during this turbulent time. I went into hospital on Christmas Day, 2007, and I was still in there on New Year's Day, 2008. And I thought for that occasion, I would actually write a little poem. It's very short. It's only five lines long. It's a limerick. Most of the limericks I read a lot, are not suitable for family consumption. This one teeters on the edge. On the first day of 2008, Chuck Davis sat mulling his fate. I feel so much gladder if they left in my bladder, because being the old way was great. And let me tell you, if after hearing that you want this award back, you can't have it. No one does work like I do without the help of a lot of people. The library, the archives, my fellow members of the Vancouver Historical Society, many of whom are here tonight, other writers, wittingly or unwittingly. I've benefited greatly from Ellen Morley, John Atkin, Eric Nicol, Michael Cochlin, Patricia Roy, Bruce McDonald, all the others who have written about this fantastic city. Even George Woodcock, whose writings on Vancouver during the Depression gave me good material. And Roderick Hay Brown has written compellingly on the 1948 Fraser River flood. Towering above them all, my wife Edna. 45 years, and she's been a rock. My daughter Stephanie, I've left her the manuscript of the science fiction novel I wrote some years ago, and she's going to improve it, and she better, or I'll come back and haunt her. So, in conclusion, I repeat that I accept the verdict of the people who named me for this also coveted award, and I hope with all my heart that I'm still around when it comes off the press. I thank you so very much, my friends.